My name is Rachel Whitman, 42 years old, an architect living in Santa Fe, New Mexico. The day I returned from a work trip, I thought my husband would wrap me in his arms, and I'd see the familiar cup of tea he always made. But no. My house was no longer mine. The locks were changed. Our wedding photos gone. And in the kitchen, my husband was having dinner with a young woman I didn't recognize. He pointed toward the back door, his voice cold. "You're not allowed in here anymore." And that woman? She smiled mockingly. "We live here now. If it were you, how would you react? Being thrown out of the very home you built with your youth?" Share your thoughts in the comments, hit like if you've ever felt betrayed, and don't forget to subscribe so you can follow this story to the very end. Because what happens next, you won't believe. I stood frozen at the kitchen entrance, my hands still gripping the suitcase handle. The house I had once designed down to every brick, every piece of furniture now looked unfamiliar, like a lifeless replica. Everything that once carried my imprint had been erased. The white curtains I hand-sewed last summer had been replaced by cheap, sheer lace. The wall now held travel photos I had never seen. Even the oak dining table my father left me was gone. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Adam, what is going on?" He didn't even look at me. Just gave a slight shrug as if explaining something painfully dull. "I think we're clear now, Rachel. You don't live here anymore." The young woman, Talia, leaned casually against the doorway, a glass of red wine in her hand. Her eyes were cold, razor sharp. "Told you she'd make a scene." I turned and walked out, my heart pounding like a drum. I refused to cry in front of them. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Only one question kept echoing in my head. How had everything unraveled so quickly? My car was still parked out front. I slid into the driver's seat without knowing where I was going. I needed air. I needed to think. But the more I thought, the less it made sense. Adam and I had been married nearly 15 years. Though the fire had faded, I never imagined he'd one day cast me out like a stranger in my own life. I started tracing back in my memory. Lately, there had been too many things that didn't add up. Whenever I asked about his schedule, Adam gave vague answers or claimed urgent business trips. Once, I saw a bank transaction from a luxury resort in Colorado. He'd said he was on business in Arizona. When I questioned him, he changed the subject, mumbling something like, "Probably just a card error." And the phone calls. For the past month, every time I tried to FaceTime him at night, the call was declined. "Bad signal," he said. "You know how it is in the mountains." And then all the things I'd brushed off, because I trusted him, came rushing back like puzzle pieces snapping into place. I grabbed my phone, opened the banking app, intending to look through old transactions when something strange happened. The account in my name had been closed 2 weeks earlier. In its place was a notice: "Control of this account has been transferred." A chill ran down my spine. I tried to access my old work email. Password changed. The deeper I went, the clearer it became. I had been shut out of everything and I hadn't even noticed. Not just the house or the money, my identity, my access to life itself. I drove to the notary office where Adam and I had filed our home purchase 5 years ago. The receptionist recognized me and gave me a polite smile. "Mrs. Woman, how are you? I think the last time I saw you was when Mr. Adam came in to finalize the home transfer." I froze. "Transfer?" "Yes, about 3 months ago. He brought a signed authorization and hospital records confirming you were under medical care. The attorney who came with him was, Kara Sullivan. Her. The person I'd called my best friend for nearly a decade." My knees nearly gave out. I clung to the counter. 3 months ago, I was in the hospital after a minor car accident. Just a few days. I didn't remember signing anything. "Can you show me a copy of that file?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, then nodded. "Give me a moment." When I saw the document on her screen, I could barely believe my eyes. The signature at the bottom looked like mine, but it lacked the slight tremble I always had in my right hand since the injury. It was too smooth. Too perfect. Someone had forged my name. And they had help from someone I trusted. I left the office clutching a printed copy of the file. My chest felt tight, like something had wrapped around my lungs. This wasn't just betrayal, it was a calculated removal. 3 months ago, I was lying in a hospital bed, wrist in a cast, disconnected for a few days because the doctor advised rest. And in that small window, the man who once called me his wife laid the groundwork to erase me from everything we'd built together. When I got back to a small rental up north of Santa Fe, a place my former mother-in-law once provided for her gardener, I just sat there in the worn-down room, gripping the folder like it was the only thing holding me upright. I stared at our old wedding photo, now crumpled inside my suitcase after being torn down from the wall years ago. Had I been blind? Or had I been led so carefully that I didn't even realize what I was losing? I opened my phone and scrolled through old pictures. Adam's birthday last year. I threw a backyard party, baked his favorite cake from scratch, even hired a live band. He smiled so brightly in those photos. And now that same man had looked at me like I was trespassing. Well, I wasn't going to let them bury me like this. I was going to take back everything that was mine. But I wouldn't do it alone. The next morning I got up early, still unable to fully accept what I had uncovered. Sleep the night before had been restless, as if my entire brain was trying to make sense of the cruel fact that the home I spent over a decade building was no longer legally mine, and I had no idea. I made myself a strong cup of coffee, my hands trembling slightly as I stirred. Only one name was on my mind: Kara Sullivan. Kara had been the only friend I kept in close contact with over the past 10 years. We met through a community project back when she worked at a small law office in Albuquerque. I had trusted her completely. There was a time I used to joke, if someone ever stabbed me in the back, I'd just hope it wasn't her. And yet, I drove to the law firm where Kara was now a senior partner. The building stood in the center of town, all glass and steel, reflecting the bright morning sun. I walked into the lobby, my heart racing, palms damp with sweat. Kara came out to greet me in a pale gray suit, her blonde hair neatly pinned up like always. Her face hadn't changed much, but her eyes were different. When she saw me, she paused. "Rachel? Wow, I wasn't expecting to see you here," she said with a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I need to talk." "Alone," I said quickly, skipping pleasantries. She nodded and led me to a small conference room at the end of the hall. When the door closed behind us, the air turned heavy. "I'll get straight to it," I began, locking eyes with her. "I just found out the house has been transferred to Adam's name. The paperwork has my signature, but I never signed anything." The notary office said, "You were the representing attorney." Kara stayed silent. No denial. No surprise. Just a slow exhale as she looked down at her hands. "I was going to tell you, but Adam said you'd agreed. He brought medical records, said you didn't want to be disturbed while recovering." "I lived with that man for 15 years, Kara." My voice cracked. "You were my best friend. How could you not call me? Not check? How could you silently sign off on something so serious?" Kara looked up, the fatigue heavy in her expression. "Rachel, I was stuck. Adam had all the documentation. Hospital records. Assigned power of attorney. I thought it was all legitimate at the time." "You believed him? Or did you know exactly what you were doing, but went along with it for the money?" I kept my voice low, but every word was cold as ice. She didn't answer. Just looked down as if weighing truth against consequence. "I could understand if you didn't take my side," I said slowly, each word cutting deep. "But you didn't just watch. You signed off on everything. You helped Adam take everything from me." "I didn't think it would go this far," Kara murmured. "At the time, I honestly thought you were just stepping back temporarily to let Adam manage the assets. He told me you'd come back later to sign things officially." "Temporarily?" I raised an eyebrow. "And you believed a man who was secretly living with a younger woman, in the house that belonged to his wife?" Kara went silent. For a moment, her eyes wavered. But if there was any regret, it came far too late. I stood up. "I didn't come here for your help. I came here to know exactly which side you chose." "Rachel," she called after me, but I didn't look back. I walked out of that building, my heart pounding like it might burst. Not from rage, but from something deeper breaking inside me. Losing a house I could survive. But losing a friend, losing trust, that takes you down to a place far darker. I got into the car, turned on the heat, leaned back in the seat without driving anywhere. Part of me wanted to cry. But another part, the part that had just woken up after years of being lulled into silence, rose up steady and cold. They thought I would fold. They thought I wouldn't fight back. But it was Kara's betrayal that finally made me see things clearly. This story wasn't over. And I wasn't backing down anymore. I don't remember how long I sat in that car after leaving Kara's office. The afternoon sun faded gently behind the buildings, but the high desert chill slipped through the cracks of the window glass. I had nowhere to go. The short-term rentals had to be booked ahead. Hotels downtown were far too expensive. In the end, I drove north of Santa Fe into the hills, toward a small wooden house nestled beside a pine ridge, one I never thought I'd return to. It was the home of Ellen Whitman, Adam's mother. My relationship with her had never been easy. She was old school, proud and sharp-tongued, and never hid her disappointment that her son had married an independent architect like me instead of the docile, well-bred woman she'd envisioned. For years, every holiday felt like an uphill truce. I always tried to keep things civil, but Ellen kept her distance, cool and exact. But now I had nothing left to lose. I pulled up to the curb, hesitated for a moment, then stepped out, bracing my coat tight against the mountain wind cutting through the air. I rang the bell. A moment later, the door creaked open. Ellen stood there, her silver hair pulled back neatly, her face as stern as ever. She frowned when she saw me, but she didn't close the door. "Rachel." I nodded, my voice hoarse from the cold and exhaustion. "I know I'm not the person you want to see, but I don't have anywhere else to go." She stood in silence for a few seconds, scanning me from head to toe. I knew I looked terrible. Wrinkled clothes, dark circles under my eyes, shoes dusted with road grime. But I didn't try to hide it. To my surprise, Ellen let out a sigh and stepped aside. "Come in. You want to freeze to death out there." I walked in without a word. The warmth inside made my throat tighten. There was the faint scent of peppermint tea in the air, mixed with the soft aroma of pine wood burning in the stove. Ellen made another cup of tea and set it in front of me on the table. "Talk. What brought you here unannounced?" I told her everything, from being kicked out of the house to discovering the forged documents, to Kara's betrayal. I spoke in a flat, steady tone, not allowing emotion to slip through. But when I described how Adam had quietly transferred all assets into his name, my hands trembled, making the teacup rattle against the saucer. Ellen stared at me for a long moment, then spoke slowly. "I always thought you weren't strong enough to be with Adam. But no. I think I was wrong." I looked up, startled. "My son is an opportunist," she continued, her voice lowering. "You're not the first person he's used. I was one of them too." My eyes widened in disbelief. Ellen stood up and went into her bedroom. When she returned, she was carrying a stack of old documents tied together with fabric. "This is the contract I signed with Adam 12 years ago," she said, setting it down. "He convinced me to transfer the deed to the Albuquerque house into his name, said it would be easier for him to manage. I trusted my son. A few months later, I found out he'd mortgaged the house to get a large loan for some foolish investment. He lost it all. I felt like the biggest fool alive." She opened the file and pulled out a photocopy. "Look at this. That signature, he forged it just like he did to you." I took the paper, my heart pounding. The signature looked very close to Ellen's, but the ink flow and curve were off, unlike her handwritten documents I had seen before. "How did you keep this?" I asked softly. I hired a handwriting analyst back then. But I decided to let it go. Didn't want my son dragged into a criminal case. "But you're different. You've got nothing left to protect, do you?" I clutched the contract tighter in my hands. "You can use this as a behavioral pattern," she added. "If he forged signatures before and got away with it, this shows a clear repeat offense." I looked at her, and for the first time her eyes didn't seem cold. "Why are you helping me?" Ellen was quiet for a moment, then replied softly, "Because I was a blind mother once. And I let another woman suffer through what I couldn't face myself." I didn't say anything. But something inside me cracked and at the same time came together. That night I slept on the long couch in Ellen's quiet living room. No shouting. No pressure. Just silence and the soft creaking of the house settling. Before I closed my eyes, I laid the contract on my chest, holding it like a flicker of light in the dark. The next morning, while I was brewing coffee in Ellen's kitchen, my phone rang. The screen lit up with a name I missed every single minute: Sophie. Her voice came through small but clear. "Mom, I know. I know everything." I held my breath. "Who told you?" "Aunt Ellen sent me a message summarizing it all, plus a few articles about Kara." She paused, then added quickly, "I bought a ticket. I'll be home tonight." I was silent. All the strength I'd mustered to keep myself from breaking down the past few days. shattered with that one sentence from my daughter. "You don't need to skip your finals," I whispered. "That doesn't matter anymore." "You do," Sophie said firmly. "This time I'll take care of you." I couldn't sit still for the rest of the afternoon. I paced around the living room, checking the window, glancing at my phone for flight updates. Ellen sat calmly at the dining table, knitting like nothing had changed, but I knew she was watching me. "She's strong," Ellen said. "Just like you." I smiled faintly, holding my hot tea tighter. When the bus arrived, I was already waiting at the stop. Sophie stepped off with her old hoodie and backpack slung over one shoulder, her brown hair messy from the wind. But her eyes were bright, steady, as if nothing could shake her. I pulled her into my arms. She hugged me back without a word. Just the warmth between a mother and daughter, standing firm in the mountain cold. Back at the house, after greeting Ellen and eating a simple dinner, Sophie pulled her laptop onto the table. "Mom, I need your help getting bank info. Do you still have your security token?" I rummaged through my old handbag and pulled out the small token device. "This?" Adam gave it to me to check the company's bank accounts, but I never really understood how to use it. Sophie plugged the device into her laptop. Her fingers flew across the keyboard so quickly and fluently that I could barely keep up. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Accessing the bank transaction history. If Adam's still using the old banking system, I can log in using the credentials you used before. They don't usually change the security layers unless someone formally requests it." I didn't fully understand, but I trusted the look in her eyes, and the caution behind every move she made. Less than 10 minutes later, Sophie pulled up a series of statements. "Here it is. Look, Mom, these transfers are suspicious. There are at least 3 transactions from the company account under your name to one called RS Consulting LC." "What's RS?" I frowned. "It's a shell company. I found the name in an old planning memo Kara posted publicly last year, remember? She once advised a small hotel in Colorado using that same name." I sat back stunned. So Kara wasn't just involved. She actively collaborated? Sophie nodded. "I can't say 100% for sure yet, but I'll keep digging." That night, while Ellen went to bed early, Sophie and I sat by the fireplace, wrapped in thick blankets, mother and daughter hunched over the laptop, combing through folder after folder. Close to midnight, Sophie suddenly whispered with excitement, "Got it. Mom, do you remember that email Adam used for work but hasn't touched in a while?" I nodded. "I still have the password." "Why?" "I just accessed the cloud storage link to it. And here, there's a backup of call recordings synced from his phone last year, while you were still in the hospital." I held my breath as Sophie played one of the files. Adam's voice came through loud and clear. "Just focus on legitimizing the paperwork. Rachel won't be clear-headed enough to notice, especially while she's still bedridden." Then Kara's voice, "Are you sure? If there's a legal audit, I want no part of it. No one will check. She trusts me completely." I felt my skin go cold even though the fire was still glowing beside us. "I'm going to back everything up," Sophie said, her voice steady and calm. "This is the proof you need." I looked at my daughter, the same little girl who used to draw horses on our bathroom walls, now sitting across from me like a real-life warrior. In the soft yellow glow of the lamp, I saw myself in her, but stronger, sharper. I reached over and took her hand. "Thank you, sweetheart." She squeezed my hand tightly. "You always told me not to be afraid when I got pushed out of my comfort zone, remember? Now it's your turn. You're not alone in this, Mom." I nodded gently, feeling for the first time in weeks like I wasn't standing on my own, but supported by someone I raised with love, who was now lending me strength with her own brave heart. That night, after Sophie finished backing up all the files and recordings from the cloud, I sat alone in Ellen's old study, flipping through the statements, the folders Sophie had marked. Each line revealed something small but cutting, exposing a truth more terrifying than I could have imagined just days ago when I was thrown out of my own home. One name showed up over and over again in Adam's financial transactions through RS Consulting, Halden Trust Group. At first, I assumed it was a legitimate real estate investment firm, but when Sophie dug deeper into the federal business database, we found Halden had been investigated 3 years earlier for suspected money laundering through abandoned housing developments in Texas. Why would Adam be doing business with them? I asked, eyes still glued to the screen. Sophie scrolled and zoomed in on a line from an old email Adam had sent to an anonymous address. The message was short. Transfer the West Santa Fe lot as planned. Kara finalized the documents. Talia will handle the third-party negotiation. I blinked. Talia? Working with Halden? Can you pull up her background again? I asked. Sophie nodded and began searching. I still remembered the full name. Talia Morgan Reed. About 2 years ago she had applied for a job at my design firm. Her resume looked flawless. Solid education, sharp design skills. But during the final interview something didn't sit right with me. I remembered her eyes, too confident, her answers too slick, and the way she responded to ethical questions with a cold detachment, like everything could be handled internally, as long as it served her interests. I had HR dig a little deeper and found she'd been fired from a small firm for leaking project details to outsiders. I declined her application. At the time I thought I'd dodged a professional risk. But now she was living in my house, replacing me, and possibly running something far more dangerous than I ever suspected. Found it, Sophie said, snapping me back to the present. She interned at Halden in 2020. And after she left, she kept in contact with one of their partners, Miles Fletcher. He was once under investigation for manipulating land deals in the southern desert region. I nodded slowly. The pieces were falling into place. Do you remember that vacant lot you planned to turn into a public park? I asked, voice lowering. The one north of El Rio Avenue? Sophie looked at me surprised. Didn't you scrap that plan because the grant fell through? The funding didn't fall through, I said, my chest tightening. A third party bought the land at double the price. Now I know who that was. Talia. Her. And Adam. They hadn't just betrayed me as a wife. They'd used every connection I had to fuel their own cycle of profit. Kara handled the legal pathway, Talia twisted the property data, and Adam wore the mask of a visionary entrepreneur, manipulating both finances and people. Mom, Sophie turned to me, her tone serious. If we go public with these files without protection, they'll try to erase the evidence. We need someone who can safeguard it. I nodded. We need an independent attorney. Someone with no ties to Kara and who isn't afraid of Adam. Sophie thought for a moment, then opened her contacts. I met an attorney named Harper Quinn at a student conference last year. She specializes in corporate litigation and has a reputation for being straightforward. Doesn't cave under pressure. I'll try reaching out. I sat in silence watching my daughter scroll, type and make calls. Every movement was confident and deliberate. I used to think I was the one protecting her from the world. But right now it was Sophie clearing the path, pulling me back into the light after months of being dragged into the shadows. Mom, Sophie looked up. She agreed to meet us tomorrow morning. She said to bring all original documents, the more detailed the better. I gave my daughter's shoulder a gentle squeeze, feeling something slowly return to my chest. Not anger, not pain, but trust. A feeling I thought I had completely lost in the wreckage. I turned back to the computer screen, staring at the folders packed with lies, then at my daughter, the one who had helped me trace every thread. I realized that if the darkness had once consumed me, then it was this hand that would be the light guiding me forward. Sophie and I spent nearly a week preparing for the charity auction event called Future Home Collective. On the surface, it was a fundraiser for green architecture projects in the Santa Fe community. But in truth, it was a carefully staged arena where I planned to deliver my first strike against the power hiding behind the polished facade Adam and Kara had built. I sent formal invitations to influential figures in real estate, law, and local media. Of course, Adam and Kara were on the list. I signed as a former architectural partner, supporting the program. A title vague enough not to raise suspicion, but compelling enough to draw them in. You sure they'll show? Sophie asked as we reviewed the guest list on her laptop. Adam's ego will drag him there, I replied, my eyes still on the half-finished presentation. And Kara? She wouldn't let any media-covered event go by without being seen. The venue was a small riverside gallery where I'd once volunteered after graduation. Ellen quietly helped me rent the entire space, even offering to manage the welcome desk, just to see what kind of show her son would put on in the dark. That evening, the gallery was filled with soft golden light and gentle jazz. Champagne glasses shimmered on silver trays, Guests chatted beneath sketches of eco-friendly housing pinned along the walls. I moved through the crowd in a simple black dress, hair pulled back. Nothing flashy, but steady enough that anyone looking knew I was no longer the woman who'd been thrown out of her own home. Around 8 p.m. Adam and Kara arrived. He wore a gray suit, his face smug. Kara walked beside him in a silk green dress, glass of wine in hand, like nothing in the world had ever troubled her. Adam caught my eye first. He hesitated slightly, then gave a thin smile. "Rachel," he said, his voice still rough around the edges, "this is unexpected." "I think so too," I smiled back. "You made it just in time for the main presentation. You really organized this?" Kara cut in, eyeing the space around her. "I'm just a co-sponsor." "The concept was Sophie's," I replied, nodding toward my daughter, who stood in a corner speaking with a local news rep. I didn't wait for their reactions. I simply turned and walked away, letting them stew in their own uncertainty. About 10 minutes later, once everyone had gathered near the center stage, I gave a quick signal to the lighting coordinator. The large screen behind me began flashing images of green housing projects, then shifted to a series of land plots, including one that had been transferred through RS Consulting under my name. While developing these projects, we discovered numerous property records that showed signs of manipulation, I said calmly into the microphone. Shady contracts, transfers from shell organizations with title holders completely unaware. This isn't just a legal issue, it's a matter of ethics. The room's energy shifted. I glanced at Kara. Her hand clutched the wine glass so tightly her knuckles turned white. I paused just long enough to let the silence speak. And then a man stepped out from behind the stage, Detective Martin Grayson. He walked onto the stage without fanfare or introduction. Just made his way through the crowd and quietly said to Adam, "We need to talk." I remembered Martin like it was yesterday. Tall, broad-shouldered, eyes sharp but measured. Over a decade ago, he had been my first client when I opened my tiny architecture firm. When I told him recently that I was facing a sophisticated real estate laundering scheme, he only asked one question: "Do you have evidence?" I handed him everything: emails, financial records, recordings. And now he had arrived at the exact right moment. Adam saw Martin and went pale. He took a step back, lips twitching. I don't know what you're talking about." Martin didn't flinch. "When did we meet, Adam?" The entire room seemed to freeze. Kara clutched Adam's hand, tugging gently, trying to steady him. Martin continued, his voice low but firm. "I've got a few questions about your links to Halden Trust Group and the recent public land acquisitions channeled through a shell company backed legally by attorney Kara Sullivan." "This is a charity event," Kara cut in, trying to sound composed. "We're not here to be harassed." Martin raised an eyebrow. "So your name showing up on the payout list from RS Consulting is just a coincidence?" I stayed in the crowd, saying nothing. Just watching. Everything was falling into place. No shouting. No chaos. Just the right light, at the right time. While Adam stammered, trying to explain, Kara leaned in, whispering something. But from Martin's eyes, I knew he'd already seen what I'd suspected all along. They weren't just opportunists. They were hiding something far bigger. And this was just the beginning. Because when light shines into darkness, not everything can hide. Early the next morning, I sat inside Harper Quinn's small office, a renovated building on the east side of Santa Fe, turned into a quiet, discreet workspace. Soft sunlight filtered through white curtains, glowing on the stacks of files Harper laid out before me and Sophie. "The evidence you and your daughter gathered," Harper said, her voice crisp and sharp as a blade, "isn't just enough to indict Adam and Kara. It's strong enough to reopen the Halden Trust investigation and review all transactions involving public land. But we'll go step by step." I nodded. "I don't want this buried like the others. I've seen too many people burn in lawsuits drowned by silence." Harper smiled slightly. "Then we'll do what they never dared to, shine a light on the truth." That afternoon, Harper and I visited the office of the Santa Fe Journal, bringing along a hard drive containing everything: recordings between Adam and Kara, forged signature samples, bank statements tracing transfers to shell companies, and screenshots of emails between Kara and Halden reps. The lead investigative reporter, a woman in her 40s with dark-rimmed glasses named Melissa Cruz, studied each document in silence for nearly 20 minutes. When she reached the audio clip where Adam said, "Rachel won't notice while she's bedridden," she looked up, her gaze heavy. "You really want to publish all of this?" Melissa asked slowly. "It's not that I want to," I answered. "It's that I have to. Not just for me, but for everyone who's ever been deceived by people who know how to bend the law." 2 days later, the first article made the front page. Well-known Santa Fe attorney and real estate partner under investigation for fraud, large-scale money laundering. Below the headline was a photo of Kara leaving her law office, the caption reading, "Investigated for signing off on disputed property documents, enabling unauthorized asset transfers." The second article followed soon after. Adam Whitman arrested at home, accused of financial fraud and forgery. When I reached the section describing how police raided Adam's office, seizing 3 laptops and a safe full of unregistered documents, I didn't feel triumphant. Just a quiet relief deep in my chest, as if after all these years of screaming into silence, someone had finally listened. Harper informed me that Kara's law firm had been temporarily suspended pending investigation. The New Mexico State Ethics Board was reviewing her license to practice, and every case Kara had ever handled would now be re-examined, line by line. "She still hasn't made a public statement?" I asked during a meeting at Harper's office. "She hired another attorney," Harper replied. "And she's denying any connection to Halden. But the recording is enough to tie her in." As for Talia, things became murkier. She vanished shortly after the first article was published. The apartment she'd been renting was left empty, her phone disconnected, and a rental car under a false name was found near the Arizona state line. "She knows what's coming," Sophie said as we watched surveillance footage of Talia leaving her building with a large suitcase. "She knows she was just a pawn in Adam's game, and when the board flipped, she was expendable." I sat silently in front of the screen, eyes following Talia's disappearing figure down the hallway. Deep down, I knew she wasn't the mastermind, but she had chosen to stand with them. And when you align yourself with darkness, you better be ready to swallow it. 3 days later, police officially issued a warrant for Talia Reid's arrest on charges of conspiracy to launder money and participation in illegal transfers. Local news coverage exploded. Meanwhile, I sat in Ellen's small kitchen beside Sophie and Harper, reviewing the case files one last time before moving to the next phase: civil litigation and reclaiming ownership of the house. "We're doing the right thing," Harper said, her voice steady and warm. I nodded, eyes fixed on the copy of the forged deed. I used to think I was just a victim. But now I understood that what I was doing wasn't just about reclaiming a house or clearing my name. It was about reclaiming my voice. For me and for everyone who'd ever been silenced or written out of their own story. And in that moment I knew I was no longer standing in the dark. I was stepping into the light with the truth in hand, letting it speak for itself. That morning I woke before the alarm. Pale winter sunlight filtered through the curtains, reflecting off the gray dress I had pressed the night before. Inside me was an unfamiliar calm. No fear. No anger. Just the quiet of someone who knew she had come to the end of a long road. The preliminary hearing was held at the Santa Fe County Courthouse. When I entered the main hall, Harper was already waiting with Sophie by her side. My daughter looked at me with a warmth that didn't need words. I gave a slight nod. At that moment I didn't need encouragement. I just needed presence. The courtroom wasn't large, but the sterile white lights made everything inside feel stark and undeniable. On the defendant's bench, Adam sat with his head bowed, dressed in a dark suit, looking thinner than the last time I'd seen him. Kara sat beside him, wringing her hands under the table. The seat meant for Talia was empty, she was still at large. The judge, Ms. Hamilton, was a woman in her 60s with short silver hair and eyes that seemed to see through any excuse. When she entered, the room rose. The gavel struck sharply. Beginning preliminary proceedings for Case 8274, State of New Mexico versus Adam Whitman, Kara Sullivan and fugitive co-conspirator Talia Reid. Charges include 17 counts of financial fraud, document forgery, unlawful property transfers, and conspiracy to launder money. Harper rose to speak on my behalf. The plaintiff has submitted substantial evidence, including audio recordings, financial records, verified forged documents, and testimony from independent witnesses. Adam's attorney, a middle-aged man named Larrabee, kept his tone even. Your Honor, the defendant Adam Whitman denies all charges. He is a victim, misled by two women, Cara Sullivan and Talia Reid, who manipulated him through legal maneuvers and emotional coercion. I remained still, unblinking. No surprise. I knew Adam would point fingers. The only question was who he'd try to drag down with him this time. Cara shot to her feet. That's a lie. Adam orchestrated everything. I only handled documents at his direction. All the bank records are in his name. I had no knowledge of any money laundering or the Halden firm. Then who was it in the recording saying everything's taken care of, no one suspects a thing? Harper asked, her voice sharp as a blade. Cara went pale, stepping back. For a moment the air in the courtroom felt frozen. Adam leapt up. She told me Rachel agreed to sign the paperwork. I didn't forge anything. Cara brought the forms to the notary's office. She's the one who faked them. I stood without waiting for Harper's cue. Your Honor, I said, my voice not loud but clear as day in the tense room. May I speak? Judge Hamilton nodded. Yes. Rachel Whitman, please approach. I walked slowly to the witness stand. All eyes turned toward me, including Adam's, once the person closest to me, now more unfamiliar than any stranger. Adam, I began, locking eyes with him. You didn't just take my property. You tried to take my dignity, my memories, and the truth itself. You forged my signature while I was in the hospital, colluded with an attorney and a laundering ring to steal everything I built. He lowered his head. Cara shut her eyes tight as if bracing against the spotlight. But I'm still here, I continued, my voice steady. And I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to take back my voice. For me. For every woman who's ever been deceived. For everyone who's been erased from their own life story with no warning and no justice. The courtroom was silent. Even Larrabee said nothing. I turned to the judge. I'm not asking for mercy. I'm asking for the law to be upheld. And for the truth to be seen. As I returned to my seat, Sophie squeezed my hand. Harper gave me a small nod, her eyes brighter than ever. Judge Hamilton made a few notes, then struck her gavel. The court acknowledges the plaintiff's statement. Based on the evidence submitted, the court approves the motion to proceed with criminal charges against Adam Whitman and Cara Sullivan. The Department of Justice will expand its investigation into all related parties, including Halden Trust and Talia Reid. Adam slumped in his seat, jaw clenched. Cara buried her face in her hands. I remained still, Sophie's hand in mine. Not out of satisfaction, but because finally what had once been buried in darkness now stood in the light with no place left to hide. 3 months after the preliminary hearing, the old building on Garcia Street was renovated into the new office Sophie and I shared. A hand-carved oak sign by a local craftsman hung at the entrance. Whitman Daughters, Community and Sustainable Architecture. For the first time in years, the name Whitman appeared in public, not attached to criminal charges, lawsuits, or scandal, but to a real beginning. Sophie suggested we keep the exposed brick wall behind the reception desk, as a reminder that beauty doesn't mean erasing the past, just knowing how to build something better on top of it. The office was small but bright, with greenery in every corner, a vintage bookshelf Ellen had given us, and sunlight pouring through the large west-facing windows. The day of our grand opening was gently sunny. The crowd wasn't large, but the faces that did come were ones I never thought would stand beside me again after everything that had happened. Detective Grayson arrived in a brown coat, placing a firm hand on my shoulder in silent congratulations. Melissa Cruz, the journalist who wrote the investigative series, brought a bouquet of dried lavender. Ellen walked in with a group of older friends from her church, proudly linking arms with Sophie and calling her the family's new right hand. A representative from the Santa Fe Urban Renewal Fund also arrived. After a brief conversation with Harper and me, they announced a grant of $250,000 to redevelop the Southside neighborhood into a public park with an open-air library, on the very land Adam had once manipulated to launder money. This time, the representative said, every brick will be placed by the people. No more invisible hands. And we want Whitman Daughters to lead the design. I held back my emotion and nodded, a strange feeling rising in my chest, not pride but peace. As if, after all these years of being spun around in someone else's story, I had finally placed something where it truly belonged. After the ceremony, once most of the guests had gone, I sat alone in the office. Sophie was washing teacups in the meeting room. As I tidied the files on my desk, I noticed a slim envelope, no name on it, tucked quietly beneath a stack of documents. I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. The script was firm, slanted to the left. At the bottom was a signature, Talia Morgan Reed. Part of me wanted to disappear, Rachel. But another part owed you an apology. Not just for standing beside Adam, but because I know I hurt someone I once admired. I remember that interview 2 years ago. The way you looked at me, it wasn't pity and it wasn't fear. It was disappointment. And that look stayed with me. I chose Adam because I thought he would protect me. I was wrong. After everything fell apart, I found an encrypted file on his computer titled Last Ledger. I didn't dare open it, but I backed it up onto a USB and included it with this letter. I didn't keep a copy. It's what's left, and I believe you're the one who should see it. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just hope to be remembered as a part of this story, not for what I did wrong, but because, in the end, I had the courage to stop. I turned the letter over and reached inside the envelope. A small, smooth silver USB sat neatly at the bottom. I placed it on the desk, my chest tightening. Not from fear of what it might contain, but from the realization that even pawns, when used, still have choices. And sometimes choosing late is still a form of courage. The afternoon light faded through the large glass windows. Sophie walked in holding 2 cups of hot ginger tea. Mom? Something unusual? I handed her the letter. She read it silently, then placed it down, eyes meeting mine. Do you want to open it? I nodded. Not out of curiosity, but because if there's something I don't know, I want to know it in the light. We plugged the USB into the computer. One single file appeared. It was encrypted but came with a password typed in the letter. Whitman_22. Sophie pressed enter. The file opened and both of us froze. A list of bank accounts stretched across multiple countries. Shell companies. Confidential client records that Kara and Adam had privately managed, including politicians, investors, and a few names I never expected to recognize. It seemed Adam had never stopped at just betraying me. He had been building a system for years, one rooted in silence and the vulnerabilities of the trusting. Sophie looked at me. What do we do now? I took a deep breath. We give it to Harper. And let the system do what it's supposed to do. I stood up and opened the large glass door leading to the balcony. The sky was turning to dusk. The last golden rays fell across Garcia Street, warming the pavement, lighting the horizon ahead. Sophie stepped beside me, her hand resting gently on my shoulder. We stood there together, mother and daughter, quietly watching the skyline, where the storms had finally stilled. Behind us was ruin. Ahead was renewal. And in between there we stood, once broken, now choosing to rise and keep walking with our heads held high. I know everyone listening to this will feel something different. Maybe you've been betrayed. Maybe you're still trying to rebuild after a collapse that felt like the end. Or maybe you're just wondering, does justice really exist? I don't have a perfect answer. But I have my story. A journey from loss and shame to the moment I could stand in the light without fear. And if it made you feel seen, understood, then I believe you're already stronger than you think. What do you think about what my daughter and I have been through? What would you do if you were in my place? Leave a comment. I'll read every one because I believe every story, every voice matters. And if you want to keep following our journey and hear more real stories about family, resilience, and the hidden corners of everyday life, subscribe to this channel. Because behind every front door, there's a story waiting to be told. And I'm here to share them with you.